The sound of hurried footsteps hurried across the room before a girl's voice echoed loudly, asking Serafina if this was really okay. The lady in question, a refined beauty with long dark hair, merely turned without batting an eyelash, teacup still in hand. Serafina put her teacup back on its saucer and with all regality told Sandra that her behavior was improper. Of course, Sandra bows an apology for the rash behavior, but she said what she said, and apparently there's more. With her whole chest, Sandra reports to the other girl that Eric was seen having tea with the Saint candidate again. Upon hearing that, all the ladies in the room started chattering among themselves. How scandalous. They can't believe that a young lady would do such a thing. While others proclaimed how they can attest to what Sandra said, because they also saw the Saint candidate with Eric too. What's even worse is that other girls said that they also saw the girl with Valerie as well. While everybody else got all excited for the drama, Serafina remained calm. If anything, she urged Sandra to sit with them for now. The latter is more agitated than Serafina, and even more so because she can't understand how she could be so calm in light of this. Sandra simply can't stand the way Eric, the crown prince, is getting close to another young lady when he's already betrothed. At that, surprisingly, Serafina laughs because even she knows that the Saint candidate had been hanging out with Sandra's fiancé as well. Well, that gagged Sandra for a bit, and even she had to admit she's a bit flustered with that. Finally, we have the story's cast of characters. The one opening the scene is none other than Sandra Aldini, the Viscount's daughter, who is currently in her second year of High Division. The boy he mentioned before is Eric Halval, the Crown Prince of the Halval Kingdom, also in his second year of High Division. According to Sandra, the other people who were with the Saint candidate and Eric were her fiancé, Orva and Sally. The Saint candidate she speaks of is Anicap, a first year of High Division. Meanwhile, Sandra's fiancé, Orva Macrinen, is the heir to the Viscount family and a third year of High Division. There's also Sally Maricant, the heir to the Marquis family, who is also in his first year. Of course, we also have Serafina Percivalta, the Marquise's daughter and the Crown Prince's fiancée, who is currently in her second year. Sally's older sister, Bernadetta Maricant, the Marquise's daughter, is a long-haired, timid girl who always keeps her head down and is currently in her third year of High Division. Speaking of Bernadetta, Sandra turns her attention to her, obviously annoyed at the other's lack. Just what is the meaning of all this? Wasn't the Maricant family supposed to be the patron of the Saint candidate? The way Annie is acting now just shows that the Maricant family failed in supervising her as her tutor. Bernadetta didn't even bother explaining and only hung her head lower, apologizing to Sandra. Serafina comes to her rescue, telling Sandra that she shouldn't put all the blame on her. Bernadetta's doing her best too, you know. But the feisty Sandra wouldn't hear it, citing that effort without results is meaningless. What a line. Even Serafina had no choice but to agree on that one, while Bernadetta kept her mouth shut, obviously distressed. The three ladies who are seated on a separate table sip their tea in silence. Meanwhile, the rest of the girls start chattering among themselves, seeing how Sandra is so strict, but it's also true. Even they can't help but blame Bernadetta for her shortcomings for this one. You see, for the past few months, these three ladies have been quite unsettled, and the very reason that's causing a stir in the hearts of the students of Halval Royal Academy High Division is Anicap. This girl is the illegitimate daughter of a rural baron's family, located far from the royal capital. She grew up being treated like a servant, but one day Ain exhibited a rare light magic, thus catapulting her as a saint candidate, which is of equal status to the high nobility. Soon after, she was transferred to the Royal Academy, attended by the children of royalty and nobility. The thing is, there's a certain decorum and etiquette that must be followed, which Ain refuses to do out of lack of knowledge or naivete. This irks Sandra to no end, especially since she has repeatedly called out the saint candidate to not get too close to men who are already engaged, meaning Eric and Orva. But despite being reprimanded with such reasons, Ain would always counter that they're her friends and that status doesn't matter at school. The girl simply refuses to listen. So now Sandra zeroes in on Bernadetta, questioning the latter if they really spent half the year teaching Ain her noble etiquette. Bernadetta can only apologize again. In her defense, she did tell Ain all those things. Sandra snaps her fan shut as she remembers a pretty annoying ordeal just recently. She shared how she tried to warn her fiancé Orva a couple of times now, but the man is just as obstinate as Ain is. If anything, He's obviously blinded by her charms given how he has become so overprotective of her. He even went as far as to say that Ain is pitiful and that Sandra and the others are bullying her. Seriously, it has given Sandra nothing but a headache. Even the other ladies felt bad for Sandra, because of course Orva would say something like that. That's just how he is. But all in all, Sandra always knew that her fiancé had always been like that. The only thing that occupies his thoughts is swordsmanship. And even though he's not really thoughtful, she's okay with that. She believes that the real problem is Eric. She turns to Serafina asking if the latter doesn't feel anything about this. As usual, Serafina sips her tea with finesse as Sandra, Bernadetta, and the other girls anxiously await her answer. Serafina puts her teacup down and tells everyone that she doesn't feel anything at all. With that, she stands and takes her leave, while the other girls quietly watch her walk away. Serafina walks through the academy's corridors, all eyes trailing on her until she stops. Right in front of her is the very topic of their conversation just now, the Saint candidate Ain, who happily greets her. With her are Eric, Orva, and Sali. Serafina returns the greeting while everyone else holds their breath with this sudden interaction. Because Ain is close to His Majesty, some are saying that she would make a better crown princess. And right now, the academy is split between the Serafina faction and the royal faction, backing Ain and the church. Serafina notes that Eric seems to be in a bad mood, which made Ain assume that Serafina wanted to have tea with Eric as well. With a beaming smile, she apologizes to the older girl, saying she'll invite her next time. She what? Everybody is stunned. The daughter of a country baron actually said aloud that she'll invite a marquise's daughter? The chatter starts getting louder with many of them offended on Serafina's behalf. Then there's the idiot Orva, who obviously has sided with Ain, saying how she's so kind to extend such an invitation to Serafina. While everybody else is so caught up in the drama, Serafina is thinking that if the Saint candidate became queen and treated everyone regardless of their birthright, even she would have to admit that it's ideal. Just now, she realized that more people are fond of Ain than she initially thought. So this is the drama that's unfolding in the Royal Academy. The Crown Prince's fiancée, Serafina, who was raised from childhood in a marquis's house, versus the Saint candidate, who stands equal to high nobility and position. Furthermore, the latter is cheerful, optimistic, and hardworking. To the students of the Academy, this setup overlaps with the villainess and heroine of the popular romance stories in society, which gives quality entertainment. But back to Serafina. She assures Ain that she's fine. After all, she has her own engagements, and she also has an obligation to have tea with Eric, His Highness, at the royal castle. With that said, she simply tells Ain that there's no need for the betrothed to face each other at school. At the mention of obligation, Ain starts to make a face as if she's tearing up. If you love someone, wouldn't you want to be with them all the time? But Serafina merely smiled. Serafina simply smiled, thinking that it would be troublesome for her if Eric and Ain made demands of her. As for the Saint candidate's remark about love, Serafina dismissed it and told Ain that's her own way of thinking. Everyone didn't expect to hear such a dismissive answer, but Eric merely stared at her. With that, Serafina did a curtsy and had to leave since she still had afternoon classes to attend. She passed by them, and as soon as she was out of earshot, Orva couldn't help but comment on how cold her comment was. 2 days later, Sandra is once again the first to bring up the hot tea. She heard that Eric went out into town with the Saint candidate. To this, Serafina points out that the two weren't alone. They were accompanied by Orva too. Well, that is true. Going out of school grounds is one thing, but they've gone outside now. With that, Serafina stops drinking her tea. As always, with her calm demeanor, she tells Sandra that she has nothing to say to His Highness. After all, Eric has been attending their tea parties every other day. Upon hearing that, one of the other ladies sitting at the other table raised her hand in question. Does this mean that Lady Serafina doesn't mind what His Highness does as long as he fulfills his duties? Serafina fetches her fan, as she stands by what she said about Eric. He has not neglected his duties as a fiancé. Furthermore, he's also earnestly studying to become a proper king. So what more could she ask for? The girl who asked the question had a follow-up, and it's something no one even dared to say out loud, but she did so anyway. If His Majesty would take a concubine, would Serafina allow it? Both Sandra and Bernadette turned to the girl. They couldn't believe what they had just heard. Meanwhile, Serafina maintains her smile. That sounds like the kind of question people obsessed with love stories would ask. Still, Serafina answers it with dignity, saying it will depend on the time and situation. Scandalous question aside, she diverted it and countered with a better question. Wouldn't it be wise to study the matter of the king taking concubines more? Of course, the girl who asked the question has no answer to that. The more affection a concubine receives, the more power is given to her family and faction. If she bears a child, it could even lead to succession disputes. This talk about concubines carries much more weight than some noble keeping a mistress. She tells everyone that her engagement to Eric was arranged by the king, and as far as she's concerned, Serafina has done her best as a noble to fulfill her duties accordingly. In line with that, she calls out everyone in the room. Since all of them present are upperclassmen, they should reawaken their duties as nobles and act accordingly. Sandra can only mutter the last words to herself, while Serafina hopes adding those specific words would make her message clear. The next day, this time it's Ain who came bursting through their door, claiming what Serafina just said was cruel. The Marquise's daughter merely looked at her, while Bernadette quickly got up from her seat, reprimanding the saint candidate for such scandalous and rude behavior. Even Sandra's taken aback at Bernadette's reaction. But instead of backing down, Ain even questioned her tutor. How could she call her rude? The saint candidate almost throws a fit, reiterating that status doesn't matter within the academy. Isn't that what they said? Ain even crossed her arms and pouted in defiance, while Bernadette couldn't believe the gall of this girl. She's acting childish again. Serafina used this chance to insert herself, asking Ain what she was referring to when she called the former cruel. Ain had no problem launching her grievance at how Serafina said that her engagement with Eric was done merely out of duty. What's more, Ain says it's terrible. It's a loveless marriage, for which she pities Eric. What is this? And right when Serafina just told the ladies yesterday that they should carry out their duties and act accordingly. It looks like someone's already spreading such things the very next day, huh? Just then, more people enter the tea hall. It's Eric, Orva, and Sally. Now that everybody is here, Serafina suggests they should have a little talk, which the others quickly oblige. Once everyone is seated, Serafina addresses the most pressing matter, at least to Ain. The saint candidate had something to say to her, right? Ain affirms and reiterates her earlier question. Was it true that Serafina really said that her engagement to Eric is a duty? Serafina easily confirms that it is, resulting in gasps and murmurs among everybody else. Like before, Ain tells her that it's horrible and pities poor Lord Eric. Serafina turns to her fiancé, asking if he really thinks he's pitiful. Eric answers that he doesn't really think, so when suddenly Ain grabs his hand in hers. Bernadetta and Sandra frown on such a bold act, with Ain almost begging Eric not to strain himself. She tells him that even if he's the prince, a marriage out of duty alone must be painful. The saint candidate is well aware that it's all politics and that nobles have to accept arranged marriages. But she's against it because Serafina is far too cold. The latter only narrowed her eyes at the two and kept quiet. Once again, it's Sandra who is the first to call Ain out on her antics. Just whose hand does she think she's holding? To that, the saint candidate rebuts that even though Eric's hand is held right in front of Serafina, the latter remains cold and doesn't even flinch. Doesn't that make her the real problem here? But to Ain's surprise, Serafina is laughing. Ain starts to get angry. Why does Serafina act like this doesn't concern her? She should be a little jealous. Finally, Serafina closes her fan. In her mind, everybody must be thinking about the same thing right now, but she knows Ain and the others are completely mistaken. Finally, she speaks and asks Ain why she should feel jealous over some oddly charming little puppy that His Highness mildly took interest in. All this time, Serafina never thought that she and Ain were on the same level. The ladies at the academy can't help but humor themselves, especially with the new saint in training who just transferred to the academy. From what they heard, this saint candidate's circumstances are just like in the Little Princess story, no? The Little Princess story is about a bright and diligent girl working as a maid in a noble household. Later on, it was revealed that she's actually the daughter of a high-ranking official, thus boosting her rank through society. At the same time, she starts to receive attention from all sorts of men, including a prince. All in all, it's a love story that's currently popular in the kingdom of Halval. The Little Princess story has similarities with the current happenings involving the saint candidate. After all, the saint candidate was taken in by a high-ranking noble house, the Americans, and that very house also has a talented heir who is of the same age as the saint candidate. It's just like in the story. Plus, there's even a real prince at the academy. It got the ladies thinking that maybe, before she could say it out loud, the other girl shushed her, saying it's disrespectful. After all, His Highness Prince Eric already has Serafina, right? The girl cautions the other that if Sandra heard this, it would be serious. If it were Bernadette, maybe it would be okay. With that said, she hopes the other girl keeps this a secret. In the Little Princess story, the girl who was engaged to the prince bullies the heroine. In the end, she gets dumped by the prince. The prince's ex-fiancé in the story had a pretty sharp personality like Sandra's. Serafina, on the other hand, is nothing like that. She has no weaknesses and totally carries herself with the aura of the queen of the academy. She looks calm on the surface, but everyone knows she sees herself on a completely different level from the rest of the students. But then again, there are high-ranking nobles who easily get nervous, like Bernadette. Which is pretty strange, because according to Einstein, Bernadette often mocks her studies at home. This prompted them to think that maybe Bernadette's attitude changes, and she bullies people depending on who they are. No? But wait a minute. Now that the girl realized it, these three ladies from the school look a lot like the villainesses from the Little Princess's story. No? There's Serafina, who flaunts her status. Bernadette, who acts timidly in front of everyone, but is actually bullying the heroine behind the scenes. And Sandra, the hot-tempered one. Those three are perfect together. They're the perfect trio of villainesses. Now, back to the current situation. Everyone holds their breath, waiting for what the saint candidate will say about what Serafina just said about her. A puppy? Finally, Amy raises her voice as usual, complaining again about how the other girl referred to her as a dog this time. Serafina asks if it made things better if she used the term puppy, which she just did, right? She beams because that's exactly how she sees Amy, a cute little puppy, and even asks Eric about his thoughts on it. The saint candidate looks over to Eric with pleading eyes, and after a moment of thought he pulls his hand away and speaks his truth. In his eyes, he always thought Amy looked more like a river weasel. Amy was not expecting that answer at all. What is he saying? Serafina does the honors and tells Amy as it is. Eric has only ever thought of Amy as something unusual and nothing more. So again, Serafina asks Amy why she should be jealous of that. For the first time, Sally speaks up and tells Serafina that she has gone too far. But at the mention of that, isn't Sally the one being far more disrespectful here with the way he's treating Amy as if she's Serafina's equal? Sally realizes his mistake and hangs his head. Even his older sister can't save him from that. But Amy circles the topic back to her and uses the same line she always says to everybody. Status doesn't matter in this academy, right? At least that's what she heard. This time, Serafina asks just where she got that information. The saint candidate draws a blank. She answers that she heard it right before she got transferred at the Makolo estate, and it was also written in the Academy's handbooks. Serafina sighs in relief. Finally, it looks like the American family won't have to be punished for Amy's lack of education then. Bernadetta bows her head to Serafina, apologizing for failing to correct the saint candidate. Amy gets confused. Why is Bernadetta apologizing? This time it's Sandra who explains everything to saint candidate. That thing Amy keeps quoting about how status doesn't matter inside the academy only applies up through elementary classes before one's debut. This means that once they enter society, there's just no way one can ignore social status, especially in the upper division. In a little while, all of them will be graduating and entering high society with much gusto. This is why learning social etiquette during the brief leniency afforded to the students is one of the purposes of academy life. Royal and high-ranking noble students are often treated specially even within the academy grounds for safety reasons. Didn't Amy notice it before? The salon and the cafeteria is a restricted area. Only certain people can use it. Bernadetta chimes in saying that while Amy claims that status doesn't matter, she herself has been benefiting from those special treatments. Amy rebuts this, saying that as a saint candidate, she'll be treated equally with high-ranking nobles. Serafina echoes the last words she said. Equal to high-ranking nobles, right? Serafina explicitly tells her that His Highness Eric is royalty. Amy follows this logic. With Serafina as his fiancé, then the latter will become royalty as well. They're not just high-ranking nobles. Besides that, Sandra points out that Amy's conduct is a far cry from that of a high-ranking noble. If the saint candidate claims to be on the same level as them, then shouldn't she at least learn basic manners first? Orva slams his fist on the table. That's enough. He defends the saint candidate, saying Annie hasn't even been learning etiquette for a full year yet. Too bad for him, his fiancé counters him. Sandra asks Bernadette what kind of teaching Annie received. If she can't even learn the basics in nearly a year, then that has to be something. Bernadette explains that Annie seemed to have the basic knowledge of etiquette, so they assumed that teaching her for half a year would be sufficient. But what they didn't expect is for Annie to skip her lessons often. Solly is up against his own sister, telling Bernadette that she shouldn't blame the saint candidate for her own shortcomings. Serafina holds up her hand and tells them to stop. They should put that matter aside for now, but for Annie's education, Serafina suggests the American family should discuss it again. Now then, Serafina turns her attention back to Annie. Without missing a beat, she tells the saint candidate that the latter still has many qualities to improve before she can become a saint. While she's at it, Serafina also tells her frankly that she has no right to comment on the former's engagement with Eric. The whole table falls silent, while Annie can only grit her teeth. Annie is frustrated, shouting for everyone to hear that Eric and Serafina aren't really in love with each other. Bernadette and Sandra both turn, one in panic and the other in anger. Yet Serafina remains unfazed. She simply tells Annie that it was a decision made by the king. It's an engagement between the future king and queen. By now, Annie is shaking as she finally bursts into tears. How can that be when Eric told the saint candidate that she was cute? There was a chorus of murmurs. Others weren't too surprised by this revelation, while Eric pondered for a moment. Could Annie be referring to the time when she asked him if her new ribbon was cute, and Eric agreed? To say the candidate was taken aback is an understatement. She froze on the spot, then started to tremble. Sandra lets out an exasperated sigh. So all this time the ribbon was the cute one, and not Annie? Still, the saint candidate refuses to back down. So why did Eric go shopping with her back then? She vividly remembers how His Highness told her then that he wanted to hear more of what Annie had to say. Serafina watches Annie crash out in real time, crying, but no one at the table dares to comfort her. If anything, Eric answers her truthfully that he was simply fascinated with Annie's stories. Eric doesn't get the chance to hear about the countryside or learn about the lives of servants, which is why listening to Annie proved to be educational to him. For that he thanks her. Now that he's at it, he also explains that the reason why he asked Annie to come along with him in town is that she seemed familiar with the place. For His Highness, it was a rare and valuable experience to observe the lower districts. Sully can't believe what he's hearing. So all this time the prince did all of that just to broaden his perspective and further his studies? Annie claps back. If he wanted to see the town, then he should have just gone with Serafina then. Her retort is useless since Eric says that if he and Serafina went together, then it would have become an official inspection. Still, Annie says they could go wearing disguises then. Eric says he can't do something so reckless. With Serafina as the next queen, she also has a duty. Plus, if anything happened, it would be too late, and he couldn't cause trouble for his guards either. Serafina listens intently, thinking about how a handsome prince is bound to attract admiration. If she's being honest, Serafina also knew that from Annie's perspective, Eric's actions must have given her hope of getting closer to him. But the prince never even thought that he could be misunderstood like that since he's already the crown prince, and he already has a fiancé. It just never occurred to him that someone would harbor feelings for him knowing those facts. Serafina puts her teacup down, saying there seems to be a misunderstanding about many things. But now that the facts are laid out straight, she asks the saint candidate if she finally understands everything now. Romantic tales and reality are not the same. But oh dear, Serafina can't believe that the rumors about Eric and the saint candidate being together have spread so far. His Highness verifies if this is true, asking if it's really a thing, even if he already has Serafina as his fiancée. The latter says unfortunately it's true. Serafina pours herself another cup of tea, thinking that the idea of pairing a different woman with the crown prince, who already has an official fiancé, is close to treason. Those who spread such gossip about royalty and jest are bound to get what's coming to them. Serafina says that they'll have to reconsider how they associate with those who spread rumors out of curiosity. On the bright side, she tells Eric that they have already identified the households from the pro-church faction who deliberately spread the rumors and suggests they should discuss it during their next tea party. Eric is impressed as always because Serafina sure does work fast. Unknown to them, the rest of the students listening to their conversation can't believe that these are the kinds of topics their future king and queen are talking about during their time tea parties. For the nth time, Ani comments on Eric and Serafina's relationship again, obviously favoring the prince. The two are always working since they will be stuck in a loveless marriage. Poor Eric. On top of the immense pressure to become the king, he also has no peace. Obviously, only Sally and Orva fall for her act while Serafina laughs at the saint candidate again. Suddenly she turns serious and said that she and Eric are united by a firm bond. They're under a mission and duty to support, protect, and elevate this country. Serafina finds it insulting to compare their bond to such a shallow emotion as love. Ever since their engagement was decided 7 years ago, both Serafina and Eric have received education to shoulder the weight of the nation. Their relationship, which is built on that trust, cannot be inferior to a romantic feeling. But if they want to talk about love, then Serafina would oblige them. The only thing she will say is this: she loves this country. A queen is the mother of the nation. What more could be needed than that? Eric shows his support to her and cements their relationship even further by saying they should love and raise the country together. Bernadetta and Sandra both look at Serafina in awe. The queen of the academy is never shaken. Sandra glances at her fiancé, Orva, who looks distraught. Inside her pocket, Sandra clutches the accessory and makes a mental note that she also needs to reflect on this. So up next we have the case of Viscountess Sandra Aldini. Let's wind it back to 5 days before the commotion caused by the saint candidate. Sandra sits in front of the vanity mirror with her personal maid dressing her hair. Speaking of dress, the maid tells her mistress that the dress for the garden party hosted by Countess Tilgal will be arriving that evening. Sandra is pleased that the dress will make it in time, most especially since she's been looking forward to how it turned out. While her maid finishes dressing her hair, Sandra makes a mental note to give Orva a heads up about the event, and before long, her hair is done. At the academy, one of the students called out to her. They can't help but notice the ribbon in her hair. Of course they will. She explains that it's made from the fabric woven in the Taltini region. This particular hair accessory is made of fine quality. Just look at the embroidery thread and how it shines beautifully with that luster. When they heard where it was from, the two ladies became even more enamored with the accessory. Based on what they heard, it's made of very fine quality indeed, and is quite hard to obtain right now. Sandra tells them that her father's trading company is currently arranging distribution channels, so she believes everyone will be able to get this accessory soon. The girls are happy to hear that and look forward to that. One of the other girls brings up another subject Sandra talked about the other day, and while doing so raised her hand to flick her hair. But as soon as she did, the girl's hand accidentally slapped another's hand. The girl turns to apologize to the other person, and that's when they see that it's actually the saint candidate. Ani holds her hand in pain, which isn't really supposed to be a big deal, but of course Orva quickly checks on her worry etched on his face. Even though Ani says she's okay, it's pretty obvious that she's in pain, with Orva putting his hand over her shoulder to comfort her. He even had the gall to say that Ani should go to the infirmary just in case. And for what? For a mild slap on the hand. The two girls can't help but comment on how improper Orva and Ani were acting. And besides, is the pain really that bad that they have to go to the infirmary for it? Meanwhile, Sandra watches, obviously annoyed at how her fiancé is acting. She sighs, and after a beat she tells Ani that if she's fine then she should stop leaning her head over Orva's shoulder and move away from him. Orva, the absolute fool that he is, dares to raise his voice and even says that they're the ones who hurt Ani. Yet that's all they have to say to her? Sandra answers matter-of-factly about how he's exaggerating with the use of the word hurt in this situation. Besides, they merely brushed hands for Pete's sake. But Orva refuses to tone it down, asking if this is how a perpetrator should say it. While perpetrator, big word for a mere act of brushing hands, no? What's more, he claims that they didn't even apologize. Did they do that on purpose? Sandra maintains a level head, but her fiancé is really out here acting like they're the ones at fault. She could only sigh and tell him that he's being too loud, then turn to the other girl, confirming if she apologized, which the latter affirms by nodding. Orva is still not pleased, yet he starts to turn away, his hand still on Ani's shoulder. He detests how these girls cover each other's backs, and even insults them for always talking about accessories. If that's the only thing they will talk about, then why bother attending the academy in the first place? Okay, that's it, he wants to go low? Sandra can go lower, so she finally fights back, as her fiancé and the saint candidate turn their backs. She calls out Orva for talking big like that when their servants have been lamenting. From what she heard, they've been worrying like crazy seeing how the heir to the family is graduating this year. But all he does is swing his sword from morning until night. With that said, they can't help but wonder if he can really manage the territory. Sandra has every right to talk this way, because her family, the Aldinis, are widely successful in business, sharp in profits, and have a pretty strong presence in the social scene. That obviously hit a nerve because Orva whipped his head back so fast, anger evident on his face. It's true the Macrinen family is an elite knight lineage, but they're pretty weak when it comes to subtle political maneuvering. And Sandra is still not done. She also calls him out for for being so shameless at putting his hands on another woman's shoulders right in front of his own fiancé. Sandra wonders what Orva's poor mother would say if she found out about this. She'd be absolutely shocked, and ever since the incident, she's been intolerant of unfaithful men. At the mention of that, Orva backed down a little. Finally, Sandra turns to the saint candidate. How many times does she have to tell Amy? A proper lady of age should not let men touch her freely, it's improper. Of course, Amy is quick to summon tears in her eyes, saying that Orva was only worried about her. Sandra is close to fuming. The nerve of this girl. She remains rude, vulgar, and unrefined. Such a boorish, ill-mannered child Amy is. Sandra finds the latter's behavior so unbearable that even though she points it out every time, Amy never changes. On top of that, for some reason, Amy also always clings to high-ranking noble sons who already have their own fiancés. This girl is really acting like the main character, and no words are enough to say how much Sandra hates the saint candidate. She's such a joke. Sandra firmly stands on the belief that the true queen of the academy is Serafina and no one else. And yet, this uncouth saint candidate even goes as far as interacting with Serafina's fiancé, the crown prince. Sandra could think of a million more words on how she finds Amy disgraceful, outrageous, and disgusting. What she's doing is unthinkable. But that's beside the point because right now, she needs to deal with these two headaches in front of her. In the end, Orva couldn't rebut any of that, and the only thing he could say is that Amy's innocence is pure and refreshing, and that they both have done nothing to feel guilty about. For the first time, Orva's face softens as he looks at Amy, saying that this is why he hates noble society. It's so full of suspicion and cynicism, while Amy stares back in equal softness. Sandra can only smirk. Boy, her fiancé is really out here acting like this. Isn't this reason enough for her to get irritated at him? But whatever, she tells Orva that he can do whatever he wants, as long as he doesn't forget his duty as a fiancé. She informs him that this weekend is Countess Tiljal's garden party. She's the leader in jewelry and design, and the idol of all aspiring noble women. Sandra tells Orva that he needs to make himself known at least a little in the social scene, but the latter and Amy are already walking away. Meanwhile, the two girls from before can only look on with jealousy. It's the Countess Tiljal Sandra was talking about after all. Amy and Orva are already a few feet away from them before Sandra can hear her fiancé say he understands. As soon as the two are out of earshot, one of the ladies apologizes to Sandra for the way her hand slipped earlier. But Sandra says she shouldn't worry about it. What she does find strange is how the saint candidate is making a fuss over a minor bump. Even the ladies agree with her on that. Since they already brought it up, the girl also had to admit that Orva's behavior was simply unacceptable. Despite butting heads with him earlier, surprisingly, Sandra covers for her fiancé, saying Orva is a man of strong chivalric ideas. She thinks he's just probably overexcited about meeting a saint for the first time in years, fully believing that he'll calm down soon enough. The lady's admiration for her grew even more with what she's doing, showering her with praise. Sandra knows how to deal with a musclehead like Orva, but her real problem is this. She can't believe Serafina is turning a blind eye to that ill-mannered saint candidate. One of the girls tells her that she's bordering on disrespect with what she said, but Sandra won't take it back. Serafina should assert her presence more firmly. In her eyes, there's no one else who could be the next queen but Serafina, because no other lady is as perfect as her. Not only does she bear the name of a prestigious marquis house, but Serafina also has a duty to reprimand both the saint candidate and the other overly enthusiastic pro-church types who claim that the saint candidate and Eric should be engaged. But when Sandra brought this up to Serafina during their tea party, 3 days before the saint candidate's incident, Serafina simply told the former that she had no complaints whatsoever about all this. As soon as they exited the tea hall, all Sandra could think about was why they were allowing the rude little runt to run wild like that. Just then she hears someone call to her from behind. Sandra turns and sees Bernadetta, who immediately bows her hand in apology. Sandra looks at her for a moment before saying the latter doesn't need to apologize to her. But Bernadetta insists, saying this is all because of her failure in educating the saint candidate. She was about to say more about Sandra's fiancé when Sandra finally snapped. She just told Bernadetta she doesn't want to hear about it, didn't she? It's already irritating enough for her that the saint candidate is stealing her fiancé. So if Bernadetta goes as far as apologizing to her right now, it will make Sandra the pitiful one. Rather than Bernadetta's apology, what Sandra wants is for the former to promise her that she'll re-educate the saint candidate. Sandra thinks offering only empty words of apology without the will to make any effort toward improvement is pretty shameless. Bernadetta lowers her head and doesn't even reply to the former's claim. You see, Sandra doesn't like people who won't fulfill their duties, and Bernadetta is one of them. She's the daughter of the prestigious Marquis Maricant family, yet she has no faction of her own. Bernadetta simply attends Serafina's tea parties. On the other hand, the Maricant family is acting as the guardian of the saint candidate, and their eldest son Sally has become one of the entourage that frequently hangs around Amy. Yet here is Bernadetta, who remains undecided and vague. In Sandra's mind, she has no problem if ever Bernadetta comes out and supports Serafina as the next queen. That's her right. But from the looks of it, it looks like the only reason why Bernadetta keeps hanging around Serafina is because she keeps getting invited to the latter's tea parties. Be that as it may, Sandra also finds it frustrating how Bernadetta has so much wasted potential. The latter is already beautiful as she is, yet she keeps hunched over. And when Bernadetta speaks, she looks down the whole time. Now then, Sandra says, if Bernadetta has nothing else to say, she'll be taking her leave since she's quite busy. After all, tomorrow is the garden party, which she looks forward to the most. Sandra still has a pile of things to complete. First, he'll have Orva memorize all he needs to know about the Macronin territory and the carriage ride on the way to the party. Then, she'll introduce him during the greeting to the Countess. She makes a mental note to do a final check on the outfit and accessories, too. Speaking of accessories, Sandra's only regret is she couldn't get her hands on an early piece from the Countess brand. She had hoped to just get one for the sake of a conversation piece. The next day, Sandra is all dolled up, waiting for her fiancé. Orva seems to be running late, huh? Just then, the main door opens, so Sandra makes her way to the receiving area. A boy bows before her, saying it has been a while since he has seen her, and thanks Sandra for taking care of his brother Orva. Huh? Sandra is surprised to see Lord Gerald, a younger man with a kind face, smiling sweetly at her. Why is Gerald here? Sandra sure didn't expect the younger man to appear as her escort. This young man is the Viscount's second son, Gerald Macronin, who is a second-year middle school student. But wait, does this mean Orva stood her up again? Sandra makes her way down and approaches Gerald, with the latter beaming as he explains that he was asked to come and escort Sandra in place of his older brother, who had something urgent to do. Sandra takes Gerald's extended hand and smiles meekly, but in her mind, she's fuming. How could Orva forget? Even after she reminded him so many times, too. At the carriage ride, Sandra has a smile plastered on her face, but she's way inside her head thinking about how Orva ditched her again. He keeps acting like this even if it's been decided that he'll join the Knight Order after graduation. As the one who will inherit the Macronin family, that's not the only thing he should think about. Does he have no thoughts about appearances in society? How many times does he have to bail on his promises before he's satisfied? She remembers how the latter was too busy back then, either with sword training or participating in night drills. She can't believe the likes of him. And he's supposed to be the future aide to the king, too. Gerald calls her name, pulling Sandra out of her thoughts as he presents a brooch to her. He wants her to have it. Sandra can't believe it. This is an early piece from the Countess Tilgil's brand. He smiles triumphantly, because Sandra knows her stuff. He thought it would be a nice touch, which was why he got it prepared in advance. Sandra is still reeling from shock. She touches the bracelet she's wearing, saying how she could only barely get her hands on the current pieces. So how did Gerald get his hands on this one? Simple. Gerald used his mother's connections. Well, that makes sense. Sandra knows full well that the Macronin family has a long history of strong connections among the nobility after all. She smiles and thanks Gerald for the accessory, saying that if he insists, then she'll just borrow it. But the latter says Sandra can keep it, leaving her shocked for the second time in the same hour, which is quickly followed by her third shock a moment later. Gerald holds the same accessory, saying he has another one like it. Sandra keeps quiet and asks him if they will be wearing matching accessories. Gerald says yes, asking if she's okay with her wearing it with him. Sandra ponders for a moment because it's a little off to match accessories with a man who is not her fiancé. But at the same time, wearing something this exquisite would be a waste. In the end, her latter choice prevailed as she took the brooch from Gerald. Matching with her partner for the party doesn't seem too bad. She pins it on the fabric, positioning it near her left collarbone. She asks Gerald if it suits her, and if it's not obvious enough, the boy is smitten. Thankfully, he managed to recover in time, beaming as he said that the brooch matches Sandra's eyes perfectly. She thanks him for the compliment, but in her mind she's thinking that if Gerald managed to prepare such a perfect piece of jewelry for her, then it only means that he already knew in advance that his older brother wouldn't make it to today's event. Sandra feels anger starting to boil inside her as the picture of Ain and Orva sitting together flashes in her mind. If Orva can have time for tea parties with the Saint candidate, then he should be sending a personal apology to her. But back to Gerald. She remembers the younger man said he had a brooch prepared. But if Orva's sudden commitment is really urgent, one of them is clearly lying. There's no way Orva could have prepared and arranged all this. He doesn't even understand the values of accessories normally. On the other hand, Gerald here does. Sandra strikes up a conversation commending Gerald for being so well-versed in ornaments. He answers that even though their family is a knightly family, their domain has a mine. And as a member of the family, it's important as a topic of conversation in society. Hearing him speak like this, Sandra can't help but compare the brothers. Where Orva excels in swordsmanship and has little regard for education, here's Gerald, who is thoughtful and considerate. The striking difference. Looking at the younger man, Sandra notes how healthy he is, considering how she heard that he was a weak child back then. Compared to the musclehead Orva, who was born with a strong frame and started wielding the sword before he could think, Gerald's skills with the sword are far less, and he's much more delicate. Furthermore, Gerald is also gentle and kind to women, which explains why he's pretty popular in society. Sandra sighs and says aloud that if only Orva would take just a sliver of Gerald's example. But the latter dismissed that thought. He feels a little unsettled because unlike his strong brother, Gerald claims he is a weakling. Sandra tells him right then and there that it's fine if he chooses a different path besides the sword. She continues, saying that everyone has different strengths, so he should use what he has to its fullest. Just make up for what he lacks elsewhere. He can constantly reflect on his talents and continue to work hard. After all, everyone has their own path set, so he only needs to dedicate himself to fulfilling his responsibilities. For a second there, Gerald saw an image of the young Sandra flash before him. He flushes and thanks Sandra. Then he turns serious, asking her if he can have a bit of her time after the party. Well, of course. Sandra tells him that she doesn't mind at all, which immediately lifts Gerald's spirit. Seeing Gerald smile with his kind features, Sandra can't help but note how strikingly different the two brothers are from each other. And now let's talk about the day before the Saint candidate incident. Sandra stands primly in front of the academy entrance. In her mind, she'll have Orva apologize for yesterday's matter, and then she'll press him about what he sees for the future. The other students pass by Sandra and greet her, when suddenly she pulls a face upon hearing a familiar but unwelcome voice. The Saint candidate has arrived along with Eric, Orva, and Solly surrounding her. Amy's voice rings loud saying how much fun she had yesterday and asking if they want to go out again sometime. Orva is quick to confirm, while Eric merely said it was intriguing. Did Sandra hear that right? Amy said yesterday, right? Sandra moves away from her spot and approaches their group with Amy and Eric the first to notice her. Sandra curtsies to the prince, to which Eric greets her with a good morning. She maintains grace and apologizes for interfering with them in the middle of their conversation, but she couldn't help doing so given how she heard that person, aka Amy, shouting in the street. Sandra smiles, but there is fury behind that facade as she asks the Saint candidate if they went out somewhere yesterday. Amy happily confirms that it's just as Sandra heard. The Saint candidate starts rambling about how Eric said he wanted someone to show him around town, so naturally Ani and Orva went with him. Orva has his eyes averted from Sandra. Meanwhile, the rest of the students who were coming in for today's classes stopped in their tracks as they listened in on this shocking revelation. Did they hear that right? His Highness actually went with the Saint candidate, even if there were guards available. Ani, who's oblivious that they're creating a spectacle, even dared to ask Orva how fun it was. Sandra only looks at him with a blank expression, but Orva still can't even look at his fiancé while answering Ani that he had fun. Oh wait, Ani remembers something. She points to her new hair accessory, saying Orva bought it for her yesterday. Sandra can't believe her ears. Meanwhile, Orva's panic is becoming more evident by the second, still refusing to look at Sandra as all this happened. But there goes Ani, saying Sandra has such a kind fiancé. Ani reaches out and tugs Eric's blazer, saying they should go again, which Eric says yes to. With that, their group passed by Sandra, and she remained standing there, not exchanging a single word with her fiancé. Later that day, Sandra finally confronts Orva. What was he thinking? Orva has his arms crossed, defensively using the excuse that he was acting as a guard. They couldn't let Eric go out alone with the Saint candidate after all. Sandra points out that if it's about guarding His Highness, then there are professionals for that. But judging from the situation, it looks like Orva already knew in advance that he would be going into town. He knows that, right? If that was so, then why didn't he even explain or apologize to Sandra? Orva didn't say a word, and when he did, he said that it was because if he told her, then she would have definitely objected. Of course she would be against it. Sandra is mad because supposedly this time it was Eric who invited the Saint candidate, but Ani always behaves without restraint. She stresses that it's Orva's responsibility as a prospective royal aide to advise His Highness not to accompany such an indecent person. After she finished speaking, Orva only sighed. This time he stares daggers at his fiancée, saying he's amazed at how Sandra comes up with so many insults, one after another. She's taken aback but quickly recovers, saying those aren't insults, they're facts. If Ani were here right now, she would still say the same things directly to the Saint candidate. Orva raises his voice at how ridiculous his fiancé sounded. He tells Sandra that there's no way he'd let Ani hear his fiancé's filthy verbal abuse. Again, Sandra points out that it's not abuse. She's merely pointing out the facts and giving advice, but Orva is not hearing her. He tells her that Ani is a pure-hearted girl who is happy with a hair ornament from a downtown street stall, blushing a little as he remembers it. Then, just as suddenly, he glares at Sandra, telling her straight up that she shouldn't lump Ani with herself, who only decorates herself in expensive items that don't look all that different. That was not only a huge blow to Sandra, it's a low blow as well. With that, Orva walks away and leaves her standing by herself. Her family, the Aldinis, deals heavily in fashion and accessories. Sandra herself is an important representative of their family's brand. Orva may say all she talks about is ornaments, but she always works to stay in form. More importantly, she genuinely loves to dress up. She has real confidence in the things that she wears. But now, even those are being belittled by none other than her very fiancé. Sandra is always on the move. If it were His Highness, the Crown Prince's idea to visit the town, then Sandra would take it upon herself to inform Serafina immediately. But to her shock, the latter showed no reaction and made no move. What's more, Serafina said that she has nothing to say to His Highness, since according to her he's properly attending the tea parties held every other day. Do they have tea parties? This is the first time Sandra has heard about those. Tea parties aside, she feels a little envious of how Serafina's fiancé is attentive to her. But then again, what else did she expect? Those two will be the future king and queen of the country. Besides, the bond they shared was not a romantic relationship, but rather they put in the effort to converse and study together as students for the future. Could this mean that their relationship between the Saint candidate and His Highness is akin to? Well, we never get to hear Sandra's next thoughts because one of the girls asks Serafina if she doesn't care what His Highness does outside as long as his duties are fulfilled. As we all know, Serafina answered gracefully, saying the Crown Prince has never neglected his duties as a fiancé, and he's also studying to become a proper king. With someone so diligent like him, there's nothing more Serafina could ask for. They all thought that was the end of the discussion, but to their shock, another girl asked a scandalous follow-up question. Does this mean Serafina would allow it if the Crown Prince requested a concubine? How shameful. Both Sandra and Bernadetta were shocked at this girl's audacity. This nameless noble lady was already permitted to join their salon, and yet she had to ask something shameful of the future queen. Sandra believes this girl is clearly swayed by that airhead of a saint candidate as if her brain were stuffed with cotton. This all came from the ridiculous suggestion from the church faction. One of the leaders suggested making the saint candidate the second queen, and even quoted a popular story called The Little Saint's Tale that is currently trending among the masses. As a result, many romance-obsessed girls have become more enamored by it. The mere thought of Aine becoming the queen, even if it's only the second queen at that, fills Sandra with rage because there's no way a woman like that could serve as queen. But to Sandra's surprise, Serafina doesn't look offended at all. In fact, the future queen is even smiling. As always, Serafina still answers the question gracefully, saying that it depends on the time and situation. But concubine talk aside, she suggests they should review their studies first. Sandra understands where Serafina is coming from, since if the crown prince ever takes a concubine, it has the potential to shift the entire balance of noble power. A story is just a story, and if one can't distinguish that, then they have no place here. Serafina continues that the king decided on her engagement to His Highness. Therefore, she considers it her noble duty to make the appropriate efforts in answer to that call. Furthermore, she reminds everyone present that they are all upper-class students as well, so they should reflect on their noble responsibilities and act accordingly. This very moment made Sandra realize that there is no one else fit to be the future queen apart from Serafina. After their tea, everyone went their separate ways, and Sandra pondered on a lot of things. For one, she used to think that Serafina should at least take command within the academy. But boy was she wrong on that one. This is not the time to be waiting for Serafina's instructions. Sandra knows she must also act as a noble who supports the nation. She shouldn't be concerned with an uneducated saint candidate or a foolish fiancé. And then, the day of the saint candidate incident finally came. Serafina finally expresses her thoughts on the crown prince and the saint candidate's alleged closeness. With the future queen wondering why she should feel jealous of a little puppy with a different coat that His Highness happened to take an interest in. Aine, the saint candidate, who barged in of her own accord, was never even considered worth dealing with from the beginning by the future queen. After all, Serafina has a firm belief that she exists on a different level than schoolyard romances or sandbox faction disputes. Most of all, if they're talking about love, Serafina openly says how much she loves the nation. A queen is the mother of the country, so what more is needed beyond that? Her whole proclamation just made Sandra admire Serafina even more, while also putting people in their rightful places. Sandra can't believe how noble and virtuous Serafina is. The latter rightfully crushed the saint candidate's whiny appeals, corrected misunderstandings without hesitation, and even displayed a healthy relationship with the crown prince. Who could possibly object to the rightful future queen? After that, Sandra's fiancé and Bernadetta's brother obviously still sided with the saint candidate, accompanying her as they left the salon. Well, at least Aine finally got doused with the cold, hard truth. With that, she and Bernadetta also left, and while walking, Sandra remembers how Bernadetta stood up and chastised Aine during the confrontation with Serafina. At that moment, she noticed how the long-haired beauty's posture was upright and dignified, which was the very image of a noble lady. It made Sandra think that maybe Bernadetta is also trying to grow like herself. Suddenly, she speaks up and tells Bernadetta that she has made up her mind, leaving the latter a little confused. Sandra proclaims that she will serve this country and Serafina for the rest of her life. With eyes gleaming, she says this is her duty as someone born a noble in this nation. With that, she walks away, already thinking about the things that must be done and taken on proactively. Sandra may come from a newly raised Viscount family, and she knows the reason why she's able to stay close to Serafina is because she showed interest in the trends Sandra initiated. Sandra decides to hold on to this opportunity and make the most out of it. To say Sandra moves quickly is an understatement, because that very night she had called for a family meeting to talk with her two older brothers and her father. The young noble lady shares her plan, starting with crushing the dreamy fools and the church faction. From there, they will sell the royal family a favor and then expand their market through the royal faction. Suffice it to say, Sandra's endgame is to have the future king and queen as their backers. She vouches that the royal couple has the capacity to accept new things, stressing to her father how this is a great business opportunity. The Aldini patriarch clears his throat first before sharing how he heard that the crown prince is quite curious, which is pretty timely on their end. Sandra feels uplifted at her father's support, but his older brother was quick to comment that someone like her getting involved could only worsen the situation. He points out that it takes an absurd amount of time and effort for people like them, who do not have significant status, to deal with the royal family to establish themselves. Her other brother thinks so too, saying that Sandra's impulsiveness is the issue, emphasizing the need to lay the groundwork first. Both brothers tell her that they don't think she has the capability to do all that. Finally, their father speaks again and actually backs Sandra in subtle ways. He reminds them that she has seen the crown prince and his fiancé up close, so her insights cannot be ignored. Be that as it may, their father also points out that her brothers raised valid points as well. Sandra nods, while her father continues that even if she's an excellent poster girl, she's not suited to handling behind-the-scenes transactions and whatnots. Sandra herself admits that she lacks in that department too, but that reason is why she's seeking their guidance about it, since she too wishes to grow. All the men turned to her as silence fell in the room. Now fast forward to a few days after the Saint candidate incident. The doors to the salon flew open as Orva marched in, fuming and shouting, asking Sandra what was going on. The ladies turned to him, murmuring while Sandra and Serafina calmly sipped their tea. Sandra graciously gets up and approaches her fiancé, asking Orva what the commotion is all about. The latter throws the question back to her face. What else could it be? He's referring to their broken engagement, of course. Sandra is all smiles. It seems news of that has finally reached Orva, no? To put it simply, she tells him that her parents and the Viscount Macronin and his wife have already given their consent. All that's left is Orva's signature. He's stupefied and can only ask her why. Why? How much of an airhead could this man be? Sandra tells her to think back on his actions and try to remember if anything comes to mind. Actually, a lot of them are already flashing before his mind, and all of them involve him siding with the Saint candidate. Suddenly, he's a stuttering mess, telling her that if it's about Ain, he was about to reason out being a knight when Sandra interrupts and tells him that she was proposed to by Gerald. This time, Orva's anger spikes again at the mention of his younger brother. Sandra adds how Gerald related that he couldn't stand watching her be neglected by Orva. To that, Orva counters that Gerald must be after their family's inheritance, but Sandra only smiled. Sure, that may be the case, leaving Orva dumbfounded again by her reaction. For what it's worth, maybe Gerald got fed up with his older brother and probably thought he had a chance to step in. If anything, Sandra finds that characteristic of Gerald truly insightful. Not only did the younger man accurately assess the situation, but he also took initiative without missing his opportunity, which she finds pretty admirable. Orva can't believe it. Is she really okay with that? With someone she doesn't love? But Sandra only scoffs at him, reminding him how he belittled her and neglected his noble duties. Plus, whenever she pointed it out, he shifted the blame to her because he didn't like the way she said it. Was there ever any love between them in the first place? Sandra snaps her fans shut, telling him that choosing someone with better prospects is only natural. Well, even Sandra knows how to play this game. She's anything but a naive little girl. She knows full well that the other party is after their benefit, and she also understands that she is in a position for a political marriage. Most of all, she's not foolish enough to believe every whisper of love. And yet, the image of Gerald extending his hand to her and praising her flashes in her mind. She smiles a little, thinking that he's the only one who would say something like that. Anyway, she's had enough. She ushers Orva out of the salon, telling him to settle the Macrynan inheritance matter on their own. Sandra also finally stands her ground, telling him that setting trends and influencing the economy is one of the duties of a noble woman. She has finally lost all patience with someone like Orva, who refuses to understand that and only speaks of what suits him. Sandra has already decided who she will serve for the rest of her life. And right before shutting the door in his face, she tells her ex-fiancé that she hopes he finds someone of his own soon. For the nth time that day, Orva stood dumbfounded at what had just happened. Out of frustration, he slams his fist against the wall. Just what the hell happened while he wasn't looking? But no, the bigger question is, when did Gerald and Sandra become close in the first place? The Macrynans are a family known for producing many of the finest knights, and yet the current patriarch, Orva's father, can't help but frown at the youngest member. Why wouldn't he? The older man has noticed that Gerald never seems to grow bigger, and his body is also weak, which is why he can't help but worry about his youngest son's future. His wife also can't help but compare him to Orva's strong physique. Given how he was the only odd one out in the family, Gerald, with his weak constitution, stuck out like a sore thumb. As if to prove a point, Orva easily disarmed his younger brother during their sparring sword fights back when they were younger. The former explicitly told his younger brother how frail he is, leaving Gerald dejected because he knows he could never match up to his older brother in anything. He was always beneath Orva. He knows full well that even if he grew up to become healthy, Gerald would never beat his older brother in strength. Eventually, Gerald did get better, and once he entered primary school, Orva got engaged to Sandra. During one family dinner, their mother happily shared how the little miss visited their home that day. The matriarch was pleased with Sandra, noting how she was a very smart and pretty young lady. Orva, on the other hand, had other thoughts. For him, she was strong-willed and had quite a presence, a comment that earned a laugh from his father. From what they know, the Aldini family is a new Viscount family, but they're very business-minded. Gerald sat quietly and ate his dinner while listening to his parents talk. In his mind, he could only remember the Aldinis for running a wide trade focusing on clothing. Unlike his parents, Orva is not having it with Sandra. He angrily vents to his father, telling the older man that even though Sandra is a year younger than him, she dared to voice his opinions on him. He even went as far as to call her an impertinent woman. His father only laughed it off, commenting that holding the reins of such a woman is what makes a fine man, while his wife kept a tight lip on the side. Well, whatever, this is none of Gerald's business. He can only hope that his brother's fiancé is not a fighter like him. As fate would have it, Gerald soon had the chance to meet his brother's fiancé. One day, while he was absorbed in reading, he heard voices in the front hall. So out of curiosity, he checked to see what was happening. He heard his mother's voice greeting Sandra, surprised that the young lady had come all the way to visit them in their home. Naturally, Gerald became even more curious to see his brother's fiancée, although he had yet to lay his eyes on her. He hears Sandra telling his mother that Orva hasn't shown up after the promised time, so she decided to check on him to see if he was feeling unwell. The men and matriarch calls out to their servants to fetch Orva, but this time, Gerald chimes in. He tells his mother that his older brother went out earlier this morning to watch the night corps in training. His mother feels both shame and annoyance at what his eldest son just did. But Gerald didn't expect to see such a lady before him. While his mother apologizes on behalf of her son, Lady Macrinen assures her that Orva will get a stern scolding later. Since she's already here, she suggests Sandra come have tea with her. But the latter respectfully declines the offer, noting that the madam may be quite busy. Sandra turns her attention to Gerald and suggests instead that she could have tea with her future brother-in-law, so as to deepen their friendship. This pleased Lady Macrinen, who asked if Gerald would like to entertain her for a bit. That is why moments later, Gerald and Sandra found themselves in the Macrinen's garden, having tea at the gazebo. Gerald apologizes on behalf of his older brother, but Sandra tells him that there's no need for him to do so because she'll accept a direct apology from his brother. She beams and suggests they talk about something fun. Looking at her like this, Gerald notes how Sandra speaks briskly, something he was not quite used to. For all he knew, he thought noble women were supposed to stay in the background, just like his mother. Even though it was their first meeting, Gerald found having tea with Sandra to be very enjoyable. Plus, he was entertained by how she kept talking about things that piqued his interest, like primary school events and teachers. Just then, Sandra noticed the book he was holding, which Gerald admitted that he was actually studying about ores. Sandra asks if he's doing it because the Macrinen family owns a mine, and he says that's just a part of it. In all honesty, he was just reading it because he found it fun. Sandra seems to agree, noting that gaining knowledge is important, but for Gerald, it's not about that at all.